Hello and welcome back to another episode of MBA Success. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Jason Lawrence to the show. Jason currently serves as the Director of Education and Organisational Development at South Western Sydney Local Health District, where he leads initiatives to build stronger, more resilient teams and foster a culture of continuous learning. Jason's career spans over a decade of impactful work in leadership development, organisational culture and change management. He's made his mark at organisations like Grant Thornton Australia and Talent Intelligence, helping businesses and individuals alike unlock their full potential. Academically, Jason brings an impressive foundation to his work. He earned his MBA in Leadership and Innovation from VUCA Global Business School in 2021, holds a Bachelor of Science and Arts from the University of Sydney, where he majored in psychology, history and philosophy of science, English and music. His passion for growth is evident not only in his career, but also in his commitment to mentoring future leaders through programs at the University of Sydney and UNSW. Jason, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Ross. It's great to be here.
I had a little giggle just in your undergrad. It always just reading that just makes me just love it. The dual major, whatever it is. I love it. Well, history and philosophy of science.
History and philosophy of science was a great. I mean, you can tell I just studied what I wanted to study, right?
Yeah.
There was no clear direction in there. History and philosophy of science was great. It really was just super interesting. And instead of just being pure philosophy where you're looking at, like Kant and Aristotle and all these guys, it was like directed at the science pathway. So very cool stuff.
What and just in that your formative years and teenagers and high school and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I don't think I was exposed to too much of that type of material to understand that it was an opportunity to go and study or what it was. What was there something through your high schooling or something or your parents that raised those or that brought you those sorts of material that got you interested in that?
Yeah, great question. I'm a nerd, right? That's part of it. I'm a nerd. My older brother was a nerd. My father's a bit of a nerd, so that's in there. One of my older brother's friends had gone off to Sydney Uni and was doing psych, and they're 5-6 years older than me. And so he was talking about psychology whenever I talked to him, and about, really it's about the human condition, yeah? Like you're looking at how do people think, what shifts their behavior, all these bits and pieces. And so when I got to this, we had this big end of year science project in year 10, which was effectively do any scientific experiment you want, but you just need to write it up using the scientific method.
Yeah.
And so I remember my brother, who's a year older than me, all he did was cool water at different temperatures and record the results. And he had gotten 20 out of 20 on his one.
Yeah.
I got my older brother's friend to get me a copy of the iSync personality questionnaire revised, which was a 200 question personality survey from the 70s. And I gave it to like 10 or 20 different friends, and then I broke up the stats based on male and female and different response rates within my cohort of or my sample. And I got 19 out of 20. So I was like, this is
wait a minute.
Yeah. But that really put me on the pathway for the psych piece. And I think from there I read more about, personality models, behavior, psych, all those different bits. I think on the, I was always good at maths and English. And so that English pathway was nice and easy too. I read a lot.
Yeah.
And had a lot of exposure to literature and a little bit of philosophy, but not a huge amount, but enough to kind of steer me that way once I got to uni.
Yeah. So when you say you're a nerd, it wasn't in the traditional, you just played a lot of video games. It was you were actually interested in the sciences from a young age.
Yeah, I'd say, what would I say? I'm definitely a nerd. There was definitely a lot of video games involved.
Yeah.
But probably from the time I was 14, 15, it was just all about basketball, right? So I was trying to play as much basketball as I possibly could. And I think that continued into uni. So,
yeah.
I'd be skipping class to go play basketball or ref basketball or coach basketball. So
There you go.
yeah,
That wasn't something you pursued after school to try and, well, like you obviously uni, but like, did you try and take that more seriously?
I played. You've got youth league in New South Wales, which is junior semi-pro. So I played a season of that before I injured myself horribly,
Like,
or half a season before I injured myself horribly. But I was never going to make. I was never going to go pro. Yeah, at best, I would have made pro in Australia, which is not pro in the US. And back when I was coming through, it's not quite the
yeah,
same
it's a
thing.
bit of a different scene. Having said that, I remember being a kid growing up in Brisbane, and the Bullets were a
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, they were like cool.
because I was born in '85, right? So that whole '90s era of NBL, where you had the Bullets, you had the Cannons, you had the Melbourne Tigers, you had God, who was the other Melbourne team? The Giants, uh, and
Yeah,
it was cool.
yeah. Anyway, we digress. You're currently, like, I was fascinated when I was looking at your work experience, and one of the things that struck me and that I wanted to ask is you spent a long time in consulting and obviously helping people probably just like yourself, navigate and help introduce the change and grow a business and all that sort of stuff. What has it been like moving into, a large operational business like this? And sort of, was there anything that surprised you now that you sat in that seat rather than being the one to help yourself? If you understand what I mean, like, is there anything that you went like, wow, actually now sitting in this seat is a bit harder than I thought it would be, or it's exactly what I thought?
Yeah, it's funny. It is really funny sitting on the other side of the fence. What would be the biggest thing? Like, it's big. So I'm sitting in an organisation, Southwest Sydney Local Health District, has 18,000 staff across 6 hospitals and 5 community services. That's a big ship to steer. Yeah, you think about um, there's not well, there's lots of business out there that are big, but Southwest Sydney is just one of the local health districts, right? So we connect then into the larger health piece, which is 180,000 people, and suddenly it's one of the biggest employers in Australia. So you're up there with the Coles and Woolies of the world, trying to keep the population and all the communities and all the sub communities with all their interesting different contexts healthy and safe. I think sitting on the other side of the fence, particularly in health, it's super operational. So even at the leadership level, people are focused on operations because you're running hospitals, right? And you need those hospitals to run as smoothly as they can and as efficiently as they can. Sometimes I'm amazed by how great the operational side is. Like, it's amazing to me that we can do so much for the population. We were looking at some of the stats yesterday. We had our annual public meeting for the district, and some of the stats are amazing. Like, I think that we had 10,000 babies born last year just in our health district, and that's insanity, right? Like,
There's a lot of babies a day.
that's a lot of babies a day.
Yeah.
And then you think about all the surgeries that go on, all the emergencies. I wish I
Yeah.
had the fact sheet up in front of me, but so it just amazes me that so much can go on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other piece, of the puzzle would be, like, I'd had a lot of exposure to consulting to the public sector back in the consulting days. It's easy when you're the consultant. Like, a lot of the time you're writing a report, or you're answering a problem, or you're helping solve something, or you're putting in a new model, and you're basically handing over a piece of paper that tells them how to do it. Actually doing it,
Good.
much harder, right?
Yeah.
I'd say the other thing is, I was saying this to my organizational development manager the other day. I said, "Wow, it's really easy to sell work when you're not charging any money." Because we're floating around the district talking about leadership development and organizational culture and these types of things, and people go, "Oh, my team really needs some of that help. Can you come and help?" Oh, yeah, we can. And then, "Oh, well, my team needs help too, and my team needs help too," and suddenly you're overwhelmed with the work. So it's
Yeah.
it's very easy to sell work
Yeah.
for
No,
companies.
I like that. That's a good little segue. I was curious. So, currently, I think you've been in your current role for 4 or 5 months, something like that. Yeah. what does that look like at the moment? Like, what are you focusing on in your position and sort of like the strategical initiatives that sort of got your attention at this point?
Yeah, so I sit on the team under me is, like there's 5 managers and then about 80 staff sitting underneath that. And we're responsible for education across the entire district. So all 18,000 of those people will have a mix of clinical education that they need, non-clinical education that they need, all those kind of people skills. So this is the fun leadership development stuff, things like that. But clinical education alone is huge, right? So you think, we've got 18,000 staff, probably 7 or 8,000 of them are nurses. All 8,000 of those nurses, if they want to learn how to do a cannulation or a venipuncture, like they've got to be trained to do it. And so then what happens is, you have to start putting in trainer models. You have to start putting in structures and governance and evaluation frameworks and all these things to make sure that education is like managed, not just carried out. You want to make sure the quality is high. So making sure all those foundational pieces are really strong is a big focus at the moment. We've gone through, so every 7 years, local health districts have to put together their strategy documents, their pack of documents that goes up to New South Wales Health to say, here's what we're going to do for the community. And so we did that late 2022. And so we're actually at a good point where we've just really created the strategic plans. And now it's time to start making things happen. So on the leadership development side, we're redeveloping our leadership development strategy for the district. So that's a nice, fun, and strategic piece, which will help you look at, what's our approach to leadership, and what's the kind of flavour that Southwest Sydney wants to put on that. Do we want to align ourselves to a specific model, or are we being more generic? So there's an interesting mix of really operational, like, people need violence prevention training and safety training and venipuncture training and basic life support training, and they need those things all the time. And then on the flip side, things like leadership development or organisational culture discussion. New South Wales Health's just launched its new culture framework, so we've got to look at how we implement that and embed that into the district.
Yeah. And how does that look inside a health system when, again, some of the research I've done, the uni and those bits and pieces, I think healthcare is one of those industries where a lot of people get sort of promoted. You're a nurse and you get promoted to a team leader and then those sorts of things. And it's not necessarily you've gone and taken a leadership course, so now you've got these strong leadership skills. It's you were good at your job, so we'll put you into this management. Does that make you have to think differently about how you approach leadership development within the business?
Such a good little thing you've noticed here.
Yeah.
So we have that classic 4 stages of learning, unconscious incompetence up to unconscious competence. So that's still in place. People do, you're a great nurse, let's make you the manager. I have no idea how to be a manager, back to unconscious incompetence. So that happens all the way through. And then we've really got 4 key kind of workforces. You've got medical. People are doctors, they're experts in their field, or they're studying to be experts in their field. And then there's not a huge number of real leadership roles in the medical side of things. People are really on-hands expert. Like you climb the ranks and you're a super expert. You're not really a leader.
Yeah.
In allied health, so allied health is that big box of assorted people who sit around nurses and doctors. And I think there's sometimes the poor cousin because there's so many. I think there's 23 disciplines, or it might be up to 27 disciplines.
Yeah.
So you've got physios, OTs, psychologists, pharmacists, technically, everyone's
Things like
in there.
nutritionists and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, dietitians, everything. So speech paths. So they have a similar. It's a relatively flat pathway where you're a technical expert. Then there's maybe a team leader role, and there's maybe one management role within a largish hospital, and then you've basically got to jump into actual management if you want to keep building your career. Then you've got nursing. It's so big is part of nursing's power, and so nursing has a lot of hierarchy in it, and they've done some very clever things over the last kind of 10-20 years. So they've built the technical pathways so that you can go up that technical track if you don't want to go up that management track. And then lucky last, you've got all your, we call them corporate services, or sometimes it's called hotel services in healthcare, but this is, this is your wardies, your people pushing beds around the hospital, your cleaners, your security, the people that actually keep the hospital running.
Yeah.
And same thing again, right? Like you're the best security guard, you become the security manager, you haven't really been trained to be a security manager. So it's an interesting space where that occurs, but then you've also got everyone saying, well, I'm special, right? Like you've got to understand that allied health's different to nursing's different to medicine's different to, and so what you get is lots of context and lots of people saying there's lots of context. And, particularly in health, but also in public sector in general, you get a lot of, even between hospitals, you'll have people saying, well, we're different. And even between departments in hospitals say, well, we're different to them. So everyone, interestingly, wants tailored, like super tailored things. But from a leadership development perspective, when you zoom out, it's like, well, actually, it's the same, 4, 6,
skills.
10 skills that we're trying to teach people. So it's a mix of changing their mindset and actually trying to get them in the room with other people from other cohorts so that they can see that the same problems exist.
Yeah, interesting. With just, I guess, in terms of people listening and anybody that's a leader in a business that might sit in a different space to yours and sitting there listening going like, oh, actually, that sounds fairly similar to my business. Is there any advice or anything that you can part to them to say, think about it in this way or have this type of a conversation with the other leaders in the business?
Love it. I mean, we could we could have a whole podcast just on that.
Yeah.
I think communication is generally always the problem. I think a lot of the time it's either the misunderstanding, like the belief that communication has occurred when it hasn't, the belief that we're on the same page when we're not, and then that's before we even get to internal politics in large organizations and at senior leadership levels. You made me think about it, Ross. I think decision making is a massive one. I think decision making is a really important, and especially as you climb the rank and get to the top of the organization, you are making decisions about things that influence lots of people, clients, customers, all types of things. Have to can you ask the question again?
Yeah, it was just in terms of providing any advice to other business leaders who might not sit in your space, in the HR space, but obviously recognize that they've got similar challenges in their workforce in terms of, how they move through, what types of leadership they need and all that sort of stuff, and how they might, have a conversation with other leaders about it.
Yeah. So look, there's two things for me. One is, which people struggle with, is train people early, right? So they're gonna move from unconscious incompetence as an expert to unconscious incompetence as a manager, right? I was an awesome accountant and now I have no idea how to lead people. If you train them before they get to that manager role, even if it's just a little bit, then they're going to be doing a better job. I think that's part one. What does that training specifically look like? I think communication is always going to be part of that equation. If I think of the other big leadership kind of buckets, it's people need to learn how to set goals and kick goals. People need to, there's a self-reflection piece in there. People need to know a little bit about themselves and stop and think and be clear on who they are and what they're about. People need to learn to set expectations and manage expectations, and that means you've got to start, potentially a bit aggressive language here, but like hold people to account. You've got to, the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. So you've got to set the standard, and then you've got to hold people to it. And I think the last piece is you want to build good relationships, right? And as you become more and more senior, those relationships actually do matter. If the best relationships are reciprocal without it being manipulative. I help you, you help me, we're both helping each other, and look, we're helping our clients, and that's helping the organization do better, grow, kick our goals. And so I think there's little versions of all of those things that you can start teaching people who are, still technical experts and on their way up the ladder.
Yeah.
Rather than wait till they get there and then be like, oh my God, we need to train them suddenly. The only other thing, which I won't go on a rant about, I promise, is I would say to people, be careful about what diagnostics you're using and why.
Okay.
So, going through a Sydney Uni undergrad psych, there was a really big focus on on statistics and on taking psychology seriously, because it was regarded, and kind of still is regarded, as a pseudoscience, right? If it wants to be taken seriously, it has to do scientific method well and use stats well and do all the, like, have really logical and clear ways of measuring things. Right. And so then you look at the other side of the fence and you've got all these diagnostics like MBTI and DISC and, these personality models. And a lot of them are fun, but not necessarily helpful and not necessarily doing what they'll say they do. So this is where I think rather than leaders just deciding they like something and going with it because it worked for them, talk to someone who's in that OD space, in that leadership space, about what models and frameworks and tools and diagnostics you want to be using and why.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a big space, and as currently going through a business psychology master's, it's putting the rigorousness in the validity and the reliability of a tool is it's super important, right? Like you can't underestimate the need to make sure that what you're doing is, one, to your point, valid. It actually says it's doing what it's doing, and it will do it constantly each time the test is taken.
Yep.
So it's interesting. Now, just in terms of change track a little bit and go to your MBA. Now, a lot of people generally go and do an MBA for a couple of reasons, as sort of change jobs or to go into consulting. You were already a consultant and you did yours. So I'm curious what drove you and what got you interested to begin with in the MBA degree?
I always thought MBAs, I think I always thought I would end up doing either an MBA or a master's of coaching. So I again, harking back to my uni days, one of my lecturers was Anthony Grant, who's the guy who set up the coaching psychology courses. I think it was the first coaching psychology course in Australia, but it could have just been New South Wales. But anyway, Anthony was great, and he was also really, like, he was my stats lecturer, and so he was the one who's like, don't let people lie to you with stats. Make sure things are actually what they say they are. This is how you start looking under rocks and working out where the bugs are. But the MBA was always appealing because it was so broad. It gave you access and exposure to all those different pieces of the puzzle. Look, I think I did it partly because I enjoy learning and I was at that point where I wanted to do something else. In the consulting space, you really do need the piece of paper? I think you need the piece of paper if you want to climb the rungs to that partner level these days. I think, once upon a time you might not have needed it. And I think depending on which firm you're at, you may or may not need it. But to me, I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to get the piece of paper, now's the time to get the piece of paper. So,
yeah. Given that, to your point, the MBA is a bit like having the ability to, learn the game of chess and understand that, on your side of the fence, there's all these chess pieces and you know how to play them to get the most out of every business unit, right? And vice versa, there's chess pieces on the other side of the table, which are competitors, and you understand what their chess pieces are doing. How did that help you as a consultant? You're sort of learning all the different sort of machinations of business and sort of taking that into your work with clients.
I mean, the value of the MBA for me is, I'm going to answer it in a roundabout way. And we'll see where we land. Look, I think technology has increased the speed of business so much that, and the speed of communication so much that things become too fast to be able to judge what the outcomes are. This is the cliched VUCA thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous all the time now. And you put things out there, and sometimes like we look at ChatGPT and these large language models, like who knows where they're going to go. So, but I remember back in 2015, 16, we were talking about VUCA with clients, and I think the world's just gotten more and more murky and faster since then. So like leaders really can't just plot out logical solutions to their problems now because those problems are so big. So I think if you go back 7 or 8 years, there was a tussle in the leadership development theory land over who would kind of take that top spot. And so for the 10 years before, like we're talking like 2005 to 2014, 15, you had things like transformational leadership, servant leadership, like these models were the kind of dominant models. And then you had kind of this tussle where a few different models. These are the things around distributed leadership, network leadership, social leadership, like those types of models started coming out of the woodworks. And I think at the same time, the Ron Heifetz adaptive leadership stuff really started taking off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they had a tussle for who was near the top spot. So like adaptive leadership basically says there's two types of problems. There's technical problems and there's adaptive problems or challenges, I think Heifetz calls them. Those technical ones are those ones where you need an expert, right? Like you know what the problem is. It's easy to identify. It's often based on experience. Like the solution is relatively straightforward and expertise gets you there. And the obstacles are really the resources of the organization. Like it's often time and money. And then on the flip side, you've got these adaptive challenges where actually the problem is hard to identify. It's tied to deeper patterns of thinking or systems, and it requires learning for you to solve. And so the solution is unknown and you can't just work your way through. Experts won't help you solve the problem, right? And then you've got Heifetz that he's got this classic quote: the most common leadership failure stems from applying technical solutions to adaptive challenges. So I think the MBA gives you exposure. That's the purpose of it, right? It gives you exposure to all the different pieces of the puzzle. You get to peek behind the curtain on finance, on strategy, on P&C, on marketing, and it broadens your horizon without making you a technical expert. And I think that changes people's attitudes, that broadening of experience, and helps them realize there are other solutions to their problems, other ways of thinking, other people you can involve. You generally learn about leadership as well, as opposed to management. And so as you move into a higher spot in an organization, whether you're a general manager or a leader or managing a really big team in a large organization, you fall into the same bucket. You now have these complex problems that often require input from other people because the problem's too complex to solve. And this is actually this is something that my old boss, Matt Croxford, used to say quite a lot. So Matt's great. Anyone out there that needs an executive coach, Matt, he doesn't bang the can enough for himself, I think, but he's the exec coach to a number of ASX CEOs. But one of the things he used to say was, what's the point of having a team, right? If we've got a finance problem, we just throw it to the CFO, then why have the CFO on the team? If we've got a marketing problem and we just throw it to the CMO, why have them on the team? The purpose of the team is we come together and we are better at solving problems. And I think that's what the MBA does. It goes, hey, there's actually all these other points of view. Like this is the classic to a hammer, everything's a nail.
Yeah.
Actually, there's all these other tools in the belt that you've never even thought about that you might want to think about. And so I'm always looking at how problems and challenges and theories align with each other.
Yeah.
And so when I look at problems are getting more complex and becoming adaptive, I go, okay, adaptive leadership seems like a good model for leaders in the current context. And then you go, well, how am I going to train leaders to deal with this? And part of it is like, well, you go and do an MBA, right? Like it's gonna pull back the curtain and show you all these different pieces of the puzzle that you may or may not have known existed.
Yeah.
So like back to your actual question, in consulting, and back a step further than that, I started off in the succession planning headhunting business, as I can't remember how old I was. This is my first job ever. Like I'm sitting there talking to general managers and to execs, who are on, this is back in 2009, 2010, like these people are on $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 base salaries.
Yeah.
Like they're experts in their field, right? And here's me in my 20s, just, how's it going? Tell me about your job. You start to understand how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And again, MBA, how do all the pieces of the puzzle fit together?
Yeah.
So I think I managed to have the succession planning piece that built that for me in the first place, have the consulting experience that then really cemented the foundations. And then the MBA really, like, it was the cherry on top for me in terms of putting some additional academic theory around all those things I kind of already did. So
yeah,
it's very valuable.
Yeah. And I think what I really like about that is when you put the additional element of like, what's the problem to be solved? I remember that was a big part of my MBA journey, was just like, are we solving the right problem here? And actually having and sort of I can't remember who came up with the concept, is the whole mental representation. You as you learn a topic, you build a better mental representation. It becomes easier and more automatic to think about a topic. I think that sort of happens in the MBAs to that holistic level of business. But yeah, you actually start to ask yourself, well, what's the problems to be solved? And are we looking at the right thing? Do we need more information? And then that next step is, to your point, who can we help to get us to solve that problem, rather than just looking at the things that we know? Because again, if you haven't done it or you haven't had exposure to those other areas, your vocabulary is limited to what you know, right? So you don't even know that you need or have the potential to expand.
Exactly. And if the problem is huge and complex, and there is no obvious answer, like you just need a bunch of people in the room trying to talk about it and solve it, right? I think the other thing that was great, like specific to my MBA, so one of the things you said did really well was you had those kind of work integrated projects at the end of each unit, a big unit, like, so you had to do 3 real life consulting projects basically with the people in your team. And so you had to practice what you'd been learning for the last year, or however long you've been in the cohort. So that was a really great way to, and it's frustrating, right? It's group work. There are, the people that drag their feet, the people that do all the work, the kind of in the middle people.
Yeah.
But we were working with real clients. So you've got a specific problem. You've got students who have been learning different stuff who are all trying to apply that stuff to the problem. And then, it worked really well.
Yeah. No, I think that's also a beautiful segue. In terms of making the decision of where you wanted to do your MBA and whatnot, were there other people that you considered other than GCA? Like, how did you come about making that decision, and what appealed to you about their program?
It was at a point in time where I knew I needed to do it online. I just didn't have enough time in my life to get to and from UCIT or UNSW, which is the other 2 places I was looking at. And Harvard would have been great, but I just don't have the cash to. It's actually funny because you're working with very senior doctors in the district here, and some of them do.
Yeah,
like,
wow.
I was talking to one of them yesterday, and he has a little Harvard lanyard on.
Yeah,
I was like, if only I had the cash to do that. So I was looking at all the different online ones, and what really attracted me to the GCSE one was the project piece. So it was like, yeah, okay, great, you're going to learn a bunch of stuff, and look, I love learning, and that's fine. But with consulting, you have to direct your thinking. Like, I'm trying to solve a problem for you, right? And so I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to do an MBA, why wouldn't I want to solve some problems along the way rather than just, smash out essays and do tests? So,
and technically, it should increase the amount that you remember by thinking about it and writing it all down. Like that's sort of the next beauty of that, is you remember more.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I looked at Juicera, and I looked at a couple of other online MBAs, but I just thought they brought, and one thing I really enjoyed about them was they have this, as you go through the courses, they have videos of a whole lot of Australian leaders and global leaders, which was something I like. I did a couple of short courses with Harvard Online, and it's the same thing. It's like, I want to hear from industry experts and leaders in fields telling me about how they think about these problems, because they've been there and done that. And Giuseppe did that really well.
Yeah. No, I've had a chat with Matt. Matt's he's been on the podcast. A really interesting and dynamic looking program. When I came across it, I was like, this looks great.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Another question, and now it's gone.
We were talking about leadership, work integrated learning, using thinking to solve problems.
This isn't the same question, but this is going back to the earlier part of our conversation around learning and training and development, all those sorts of things. I think healthcare has a very good relationship with continuous development and learning. Like you said, nurses and all that sort of stuff, they know the importance of continuously learning, which is quite different to a lot of other businesses, especially, when you get into the more corporate land. They don't even remotely have a similar importance on that. So it's like, oh, you've gone and done your education. Yes, we've got maybe one of the LMS systems, the learning management system sitting off to the side. So yeah, we've given you the opportunity to go and learn if you wanted to,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it's not a concerted effort to like, oh, what's your career pathway? And, how do you want to develop as a person? Again, from your perspective and talking earlier about the importance of training early and thinking about those sorts of things, what do you want to elaborate on that for those other business leaders in those types of companies where it's not as maybe as prioritized, and sort of talk about, in your opinion, why it should be prioritized and sort of what are some of the steps that they might think about to help with that conversation?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's a great question. It's a great question because organizations they have some vision and mission and goal, right? The good ones are goal directed. They're trying to solve a problem or do a thing. Learning and development is really important for a range of reasons. You're developing capability. So if you make your people better at doing the things that they should be doing, logical outcome, you should get more or less of the thing that you're trying to do. I think the second piece is it's a massive. So if you look at all the Gallup research, it's one of the big retention measures. If I'm learning and growing, I stick around the company. Throw me, we've got LinkedIn Learning or we've got this LMS, and do whatever you want. It's not directed, right? And so that works for people who are super curious and interested in learning and like doing those things. But that's not a huge portion of the population. So I think part one is you should be trying to develop people in the capability, skills, attitudes, mindsets, those whole range of random words that mean stuff people need to be good at. You need to be doing that in a directed way. So why are you trying to develop people? What are you trying to get them to do more or less of? Those LMS systems work great for people who, again, are super curious, but that's not everyone. I think the third piece of the puzzle is we know these days what makes a good leader. So this is all the succession planning academic literature. This is the Lombardo-Eichinger stuff from the early 2000s around learning agility, right? I know it sounds crazy, right? You can read the tea leaves, and we know how to measure who will make a good leader into the future, or at least into their next role. Those are the things you're trying to cultivate, and one of those things when you look into that, when you look into what makes that up, one of them. Sorry, I don't want to get too technical, but so learning agility is the model that Lombardo and Eichinger came up with. Like, it's a psychological construct. It's relatively flexible, but it's about knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. And it's one of the other reasons that I like both the MBA and the adaptive leadership stuff, is that if we're trying to work out who's good at knowing what to do when they don't know what to do, that sounds like trying to solve adaptive challenges, and then the MBA becomes part of how you do that. But a big part of learning agility is what's the individual's self-directed learning curiosity, how much do they seek feedback, like, how curious are they? All that stuff is a massive potential measure.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether I really answered your question, but
No, I think that was helpful. Yeah, it's helpful. And I think the follow on to that, because again, you mentioned earlier level of having people needing a level of introspection and being able to understand themselves. Again, I think there's two components to that. There's probably some leaders that might listen to this and go, well, if I maybe I haven't done that. Like, again, how important is that? And if they have, how in your perspective, how prevalent or how important is it to roll that out or try and find some way to develop that capability within the broader workforce? Because I know, again, that was quite a big part of the QUT MBA at the start of the program, was to go, it's hard to lead others if you can't even lead yourself. And if you don't even know if you don't know who you are, how do you think you're going to be able to help other people do the same?
This is it. And this is why so many leadership models are broken into self-leadership, team leadership, organizational leadership, right?
Yeah.
You need to start with yourself, because we won't start quoting philosophers. Most people have very little clue about who they are or what they're doing or what their purpose is, right? And I think So I think self-awareness is a massively important part of it. And that self-awareness only comes from reflecting. It's also part of that learning agility construct, right? Is how self-aware are those leaders. So it is one of the measures by which we can tell the potential for future leadership success. It's hard, right? It's hard because you've got to look in the mirror and, some people, I remember one leader I worked with who I won't name, but people used to mention her and I said, oh yeah, she's got this portrait in the attic that just gets more and more hideous. It's hard. So there's things like diagnostics, right? And this, as a leadership development consultant, we'd go into organizations, we would do 360s with people, and that's one really important way to put the mirror up, right? And I reckon 1 in 10 people will burst into tears because you show them, here's what you think about yourself and how you think about, your leadership style, who you are as a person, and here's what your direct reports and your peers think about you, and those are drastically different pictures.
Yep.
And it can be really confronting for people. The thing I see in a lot of organizational development, OD people, they can kind of fall on two sides. They can be soft and fluffy, or they can be kind of sciencey driven. And I think if you fall into the soft and fluffy camp too much, you end up saying to people, "Oh, you should meditate, you should journal, you should, do yoga,
do your positives."
Yeah, like all these different bits and pieces, right? But context is everything. Some people hate meditating, or they don't like mindfulness meditating and they'd rather do Vipassana. Like some people are great at journaling and some people hate doing it. We've got one activity we do with leaders around goal setting where we say to them, okay, you're going to have to write down some of your goals in a minute, but you have to keep writing for 6 minutes. You're not allowed to stop.
Yeah.
So even if you finish writing about your goal, you just need to keep writing about whatever's flowing through your head, right? And you just get some really interesting stuff coming out. So look, I think people need to hold the mirror up. And I think one of the things I struggle with some younger managers who are high potentials and coming up is that sometimes they're actually not mature enough to really connect with that self-awareness piece properly.
Yeah.
And that can be a struggle.
And the problem with that then is that the lack of being able to take accountability for their part of a problem, right? So it's, here's the situation, this has happened, and they go, well, that person's performed poorly, and they go, well, that's just because they performed poorly, and they can't actually say, I may have contributed to that situation.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. And, like growing up, again, nerdy, relatively academic, I always wanted to be right. Like it was the driving force for me. So, you end up arguing when you already don't believe your own argument anymore. I think that becomes a way of being for people. And if they don't stop and go, actually, I'm the problem.
Yeah.
Why do all your relationships keep failing? Well, there's a common thread.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Perfect. Well, I think that's, I've taken up plenty of your time this morning, Jason. Before we do wrap it up, is there anything else that you wanted to share? Tips, advice, or anything like that?
Look, I think on that being true to yourself thing, which implies you need to work out what that means to you. I think success looks different for different people, and I think you need to spend some time introspecting to work out what the good life looks like for you, right? This is there's really complex models for it. There's things like Ikigai where you've got all the intersecting things, and it's like find out what you love and what you can make money out of, and it's like it's hard, right? It's hard. Most people will never do it. And then you've got things like, if we go down the philosophy route, you've got things like Kant and Plato where you're trying to account for your virtues to work out whether you're living a good life or not, and suddenly you're in this mathematical quandary where you're like, do I do this or that? And it's all silly. I think keep things simple if you're going down that self-reflection route, and you want to work out what's important to you and who you want to be, and start taking steps towards that. And if you find yourself doing things that are counter to that, well, then you've either got to change your goal or change your actions. So I think it becomes really important to work out, it's a funny one. In the OD space, you talk about values all the time. People are always talking about values. And, I remember a senior partner at the firm saying, What's one of the values that exists in every organization? Collaboration, right? And then you go into organizations and it's like, well, just the boss makes the decisions and no one else does. So we don't really collaborate. And then the culture's set from the top. So now no one's collaborating, but it's on the wall in big shiny letters. I think values actually really matter. And you have to have your personal values and you have to work out what those are and what they mean to you. You know, and I'd say to people, I remember saying to one training thing, you know, people think it's important to wait in line and take their turn. But then when there's no cars in the left, they race into the left-hand lane so they can shoot in front of everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Like, you only have your values until they're put under the tiniest bit of pressure and then suddenly it's not important anymore. So I think really spend some time self-reflecting and working out what's important to you and why, and then try and make that how you do things.
Yeah. Perfect. I think that's fantastic. Thank you, Jason. Did thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I still have 50 million questions I could ask you, but last time is not on our side. But yeah, appreciate it. Look, in terms of MBA Australia and anything coming up, we're at the end of the year and we're sort of in the planning phase for next year. So people listening, just stay tuned to sort of all the things we've got coming up in the new year. And we'll sort of share that through LinkedIn and emails in due time. But until next time, we'll see you then.